you seen through experience how businesses can navigate through that change and working with an organisation that might have a slightly different culture to theirs?
Hey, maybe I would have done this differently, but I'm going to trust the process here because I've articulated a clear enough vision. I've onboarded these people onto a clear enough strategy. So how they choose to deliver that in their own functions is kind of led by them, with me being consulted, informed, engaged. You can't argue with economic growth is something we always say internally. And so there's something about lifting everybody in order to create the kind of society that we're looking for. So for us, that means supporting small businesses who are the cornerstone of our economy to get the tools that they need to grow. The scrappiness and energy you need to have when you are a founder.
Particularly the early days. I imagine you're doing everything. You're doing HR,
you're head of
sales,
finance, HR, sales, you are stuffing bags.
The Unlikely Alliance with Johnson Situ. Bridging differences, sparking conversations.
Hello. Thanks so much for coming along. Firstly, congratulations on your MB.
Thank you.
It's really, really big. I was just thinking, and as I was preparing for this discussion, is like you must have been in spaces where, because you grew up in North London, isn't it?
Yeah, Tottenham, London.
Like, you know, your trajectory has meant that you've been in spaces number 10, Boardrooms, Palace. Is there any space you've been to that you've just thought, wow, this is a long way from Tottenham? And which spaces was it?
So, do you know much about livery companies?
No.
Okay, so London has a number of livery companies, and they were the kind of original sort of trade bodies, let's say, 400-500 years ago. If you wanted to trade in London, you would belong to a company, you know, whether that's the fishmongers, the goldsmiths, the leather sellers. It's a core part of City of London life, and it's a great way to build relationships in the city. So lots of people join them every year. The challenge is that they're not very public.
Yeah.
So you kind of can't, you don't just apply or attend, right? You have to be kind of invited in. So I've been trying to understand the companies and how to join, how to be part of these really, really interesting groups. And I was recently sworn in to be a liveryman for the felt makers company.
Very grand.
Yes, and the felt makers are 400 years old. They are a fantastic group of people. It's important to say that most people are not of that trade anymore. So the vast majority are just city professionals. Yeah, I have no connection to felt hats, anything like that. But the key thing there is that they want to be more open and more public and share what they do. And so after my swearing in, I had a very beautiful dinner at Apothecaries Hall. And I just remember looking around in that space and thinking, what an interesting space, you know?
Why? What was it? Was it very grand? Was it very old? What about it?
Very grand, very old, very traditional.
Yeah.
So, you know, you will rise to swear a toast to our king and, you know, pray for the health of our royal family. You know, there's the portrait of the Queen looking down at you. You're on long trestle tables with people who have titles after their name and, you know, who have very long histories from a family perspective. And it was just fascinating to meet people who I wouldn't, I think, get to meet in my day-to-day life as much.
I can only imagine. I can sort of recognise that as well. So I was a counsellor for 8 years, and so much of being a counsellor sometimes is the pomp and the pageantry. It's brilliant, the traditions and everything like that. And I distinctively remember one time when, usually when you have a mayor making, which is civic mayor for a particular borough, there was just a very grand affair. And the first time I went to Southwark Cathedral as well, it just takes you back and just think, wow, it's a very grand place. But enough about pageantry. Izzy Obeng, thank you so much for coming along. Izzy is the founder and CEO of Foundervine, a consultancy focused on systemic change and entrepreneurship. You've achieved so much, Foundervine. By 2022, I know you supported over 300 entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities, have helped over 5,000 leaders build skills and raise capital. You are a non-exec director for Capital Enterprise, and I know you advise many organisations, including Lloyd's Banking Group as well. Izzy, thank you so much for joining. I'm really looking forward to our discussion today for a couple of reasons. Firstly, we'll have an opportunity to talk about Foundervine and the amazing work it does, but really reflecting on the theme of unlikely alliance, which is very much how people every day, whether it be business or communities or the public sector, are coming together from different backgrounds, different beliefs, or different experiences, and doing something that really shapes and shifts society. And I think Foundervine will have, it's a classic example of that, but also works to enable and works to build capacity of other organisations and businesses as well. So I wanted to start there. Can you tell us a little bit about the mission of Foundervine? And also I wanted to understand what inspired you to set it up.
Yes, so our mission is to remove the social and economic barriers to innovation. That very simply means that we know that the best kind of economy is one where everyone is included and has the same set of tools in order to be successful in it. You can't argue with economic growth, is something we always say internally. And so there's something about lifting everybody in order to create the kind of society that we're looking for. So for us, that means supporting small businesses who are the cornerstone of our economy to get the tools that they need to grow. The stats on starting a business are very well known. It is very tough to start a business. Lots of businesses fail. Nothing new there. But there are so many interventions that can happen very early on that can increase the chances of success. There are the obvious ones, being able to support founders in accessing finance or accessing knowledge and advice. But there are the more nuanced ones that we have to address as a society if we're going to bring in underrepresented groups, because there are historic issues that mean that some groups in society, for example, women, have lower chances of building scalable and sustainable businesses. Not necessarily because those businesses are inherently less good. If anything, the stats show us that women do build stronger, more resilient businesses. But there tends to be a number of systemic challenges in terms of them being able to access what they need to grow. And so a huge part of our work is actually creating kind of culturally appropriate or nuanced interventions that meet founders where they are and give them the confidence, the resilience, and the knowledge that they need to build sustainable businesses.
And I wanted to pick up on particularly the focus on underrepresented groups, because is it still true? Because my understanding, many businesses, particularly startups, the small businesses, the first 3 years are the toughest. And from your experience, particularly with underrepresented groups, how does that transpire? Some of the businesses you've worked with, how do they navigate some of the first 3 years? And particularly thinking about, in preparing for this discussion, I looked at some of your videos, and what I think is so fascinating and brilliant about it as well is, seeing some of your workshops and your activities. It's reflective of not just London, but the UK and also the globe in many ways as well. And we can touch on some of your international work as well. But wanted to get an understanding, how has that journey helped particularly supporting underrepresented groups?
Yes, it's been such a joyful journey to do the kind of work that we do, because I think, when you often think about businesses starting up, and anyone listening might be thinking, what would a business need? Maybe a business plan, maybe support in learning how to pitch, introductions, that kind of thing. Being a founder is it's such an exciting journey, but it's so chaotic. You don't know what you don't know. Maybe you have the network, maybe you don't have the network, but often you're going into a space where you feel like an imposter.
Yeah.
You feel like you are perhaps good at something. You know, you're really passionate about the products you're building. You know, you've got a background building that thing. But the operational, the strategic, the kind of like sales side of it, that's all new, and that can put off a lot of people. And so when you're working with founders from communities who have less of a historical kind of less historical access, let's say, you're dealing with confidence, because a lot of confidence is connected to visibility. You can't be what you can't see. And if you have spent a lot of time seeing lots of people who don't look like you, or who come from similar backgrounds or have similar lived experience building things, then your sense of whether you can build it can be impacted by that. Not for everyone. Some people are just naturally confident, others just need a bit more of a hand. I think another barrier is when you are building and you are not being validated enough early on. You know, think about when you were a kid and you did something really good at school and the teacher gave you an A or gave you a lollipop or your mum told you how great you were. That then reinforces positive behaviors. And then you start realizing, this is the thing that I do to be better and grow. And then you keep doing the same thing. And hopefully you become, you know, more resilient and robust as you get older. It's the same thing for a founder. When you're at the beginning of a journey, you are vulnerable, you're feeling like, you know, there's a lot to do and it's just you're not sure kind of what the journey from A to B is going to look like. That's where Foundervine come in. You know, imagine being able to go to an event and meeting lots of people in similar situations from similar backgrounds to you, hearing someone on stage talking about their journey and the success that they've had, having someone mentor you and coach you and actually provide you some grant funding in order to kind of test out what you're building in a less intense way, because it's not debt or it's not equity, you know, it's not less pressure. And so that's kind of where we come in, and we're really excited to work with the partners we do to build really engaging programs that are designed to help founders at every stage take their businesses to the next level.
Yeah, and do you find it fascinating, particularly the opportunities for businesses to, particularly at the formative years, to almost collaborate? Do you see much of that? Do you see businesses, you know, a production organisation or a bakery organisation suddenly come into contact with a digital design and think, actually, here's an opportunity for us to be able to work together?
We see it all the time. Yeah. It's one of the most powerful things about the work that we do. Entrepreneurs are inherently collaborative creatures, you know, because no man is an island, you know, it takes a village to raise a child, all of the cliches you want, but we recognize that in order to grow, we need to have people around us who can add complementary skills, complementary services to what we do. And so we see exactly what you just said. So, you know, you are running a coaching agency, someone runs an events business, there's collaboration. You know, you run a cookie or shortbread company, and, you know, there are other businesses there who, you know, have communities you can target and engage with. The great thing is also the connection to the corporate and institutional players we work with. Our model is about bringing together mission-led institutions with founders. And so some of the most amazing things we've seen is where our startups become clients for the businesses that we're working with
really
as well.
Good. And the reason why I'm kind of delving into this as well, because I can imagine the culture's slightly different though, isn't it? With some of the bigger organisations and some of the smaller organisations, was it quite similar? Because I guess part of what we always try and see is like looking underneath the hood, so to speak, and think about, well, how do those unlikely alliance relationships actually develop, and how do they surmount those moments which, not necessarily friction, but particularly, as you say, it comes naturally to entrepreneurs, but they're bringing their authentic self, whether it be business, whether it be culture, whether it be community, to another organisation, and how do they navigate that? Are you seeing that? And does Foundervine I wouldn't say do you help in that space, but have you seen through experience how businesses can navigate through that change and working with an organisation that might have a slightly different culture to theirs?
It's a great question. Just by the way, have you started a business before?
No.
Have you thought about it?
I've kind of worked in politics. I've kind of and sometimes running campaigns feels like it feels like a business.
I can imagine.
But no, I've sort of thought about it, but because I guess we all kind of choose our path in life, and for me, it's always been within the public sector in one shape or the other. But huge admiration for people who run businesses because it's the risk involved, the energy involved, and the fact that you have to naturally be open because you want to interact with everyone. That's a huge respect.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And in many ways, that's the answer to the question there. I think there's something in how smaller entrepreneurial businesses can influence the culture and entrepreneurialism within larger companies. And so, the UK has a challenge with productivity. We have a challenge with innovation. There are lots of stats about how our level of productivity has dropped over the years. And there's something in how new technologies and new solutions can actually kind of invigorate feelings of entrepreneurialism, entrepreneurial behaviors in larger institutions. And so for me, my background is in management consulting, and I spent some years doing that before I decided to start a business. The scrappiness and energy you need to have when you are a founder.
Particularly the early days. I imagine you're doing everything. You're doing HR,
you're head of finance,
sales,
HR, sales, you are stuffing bags, you are writing checks.
And do you ever see somebody, because that must be difficult as well when you grow, because you've talked about a number of organizations who've kind of grown from being quite small. And everybody always says you want to act consistently like your startup. But then I imagine on the flip side, there's always that you sometimes want to make sure that organizations are transitioning away from being a startup when they are bigger than a startup. So the chief exec is not doing everything in the same way that they previously were and allowing the organization to grow. Do you see some of that as well?
Yeah, you do see real strong lines of demarcation between a concept stage startup, an early stage startup, and a scale stage startup.
You said it much better than I did.
And so at idea stage and concept stage, there is not a separation between the founder and the business. It is one. And so in that sense, a lot of the motivation and a lot of the engagement is coming from a charismatic founder who is able to, leverage their own skill set, leverage their own, hustler mentality to figure out what they need to get to the next level. Yeah. And then we go into early stage. Maybe there's some revenue coming in now. Maybe there's some finance coming in now. And there's the beginning of a small team. The CEO, not CEO yet, but say the founder is still involved, but increasingly finding that they are divorcing themselves from a lot of the things they were doing before. Yeah. And their role becomes to keep the lights on. It becomes to build a clear vision and help guide the small team they have in how they move forward. So they're trying to find product market fit. They're trying to see, do we have a strong enough market for this? Is what we're building good enough? How do we test it in this market? How do we help it grow? So you are still a jack of all trades, but you're increasingly kind of letting go of things so you can focus on the high level things. And then when we get to scale up, by then you found a fit in your market. You are selling, you have more consistency in the clients, you have a growing team. Your role as CEO, no longer just founder, is the kind of corporatization of your entity. It's how you build the structures and the processes that you need in order to be more sustainable. By then, you have people who are running functions, and therefore you are not you're not judged on your ability to understand and do everything and execute. You are judged on your ability to find the best talent possible and then leave them alone. Yeah.
And that must be quite difficult if you're a founder as well, because you've linked back to Unlikely Alliance, and the theme for it is that because often those individuals will have different skill sets to you, and perhaps you would need to be slightly uncomfortable with, I don't know, say for example, you said you have a very charismatic founder, whether he or she feels comfortable having somebody or picking people within their team who don't necessarily operate in that way, who may be more risk averse but be really important within the organization as well. Do you see some of that within businesses, and is that something that many of the founders you come across have kind of had to navigate or brought up with you at all?
Absolutely. When you're building your team, you're asking yourself, how much do I trust this person?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And you want to be hiring on the basis of complete trust, because you have found someone who aligns to your values at a core level, who understands the strategy and who has the skill set and the talent to be able to drive it forward. And so hiring someone for their expertise but then stepping in all the time feels quite counterintuitive, and you'll irritate each other and it will not go well. So a lot of that journey in the beginning is actually being able to say, hey, maybe I would have done this differently, but I'm going to trust the process here because I've articulated a clear enough vision. I've onboarded these people onto a clear enough strategy. So how they choose to deliver that in their own functions is kind of led by them, with me being consulted, informed, engaged. It does take time to get there. And like you said, like, people have different personalities, people have different strengths, founders have different strengths. And I've seen a lot of founders who, quite frankly, are not amazing leaders. You know, they might be talented, and because of their talent, they've been able to build something that's interesting. But in terms of being a leader, in terms of being able to articulate a vision and motivate people around that vision, you know, get them to yearn for the endless sea, they're not great.
And in those examples, do you see someone around them who fulfills that? Because you almost think about some of these organizations that they always seem to be started in someone's room and then they become multi-billion organizations.
Someone's garage.
I know, someone's garage, someone's room or something like that. Do you see that partnership? Do you see that example as well? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, you know, every kind of good organization has like a real diversity of skill sets and talents. And I always think that, and not 100% true, but it tends to be true that co-founders tend to be more successful than solo founders. Yes. And so, you know, if you're raising investment, investors typically want to see two founders. It de-risks kind of a key person. You know,
it's like
a key
if
person
that
risk.
person trusts you, then you must not be that bad.
Yeah.
You trust each other.
Also, like, if you decide you want to move to Barbados and, you know, for 3 months, there's so there's something in what it means to just have more longevity because there's two people. But also because founders are visionaries. They are big picture people. They tend to be kind of like very outwardly thinking. So you do need someone who's perhaps more operational, who's able to kind of take big ideas and say, no, we can't do this now. Or actually, you know, this is you need that energy. And so sometimes without it, the senior leadership layer sitting underneath a solo founder isn't empowered enough to be able to add challenge there. And so sometimes you see mission drift, sometimes you see a lack of momentum. But having two founders there, I think, goes a long way. How do you find a co-founder?
Well, that's a really
How
good.
do you find one?
And that's a really good question, because it actually leads me to my next question, because we've spoken about multiple founders, but I wanted to talk about one in particular, which is you.
Okay.
How did you go about Foundervine? I know was a co-founder as well, but how did you go about that journey? But then also, I wanted to explore thinking about unlikely alliances. Have you ever drawn inspiration from some of the founders that you're working with as well? And when I say unexpected inspiration, so people that you may not have necessarily immediately thought, I'm going to draw inspiration from you, but through the journey you think, oh, that's interesting.
Yes, I think that, you know, the kind of work that we do is it's pretty niche, you know, essentially providing entrepreneur support services. So we're a small business, but also we support small businesses. And so the kinds of organizations that I tend to find really impressive are organizations that are able to aggregate large networks and to consistently add value to them. So, you know, I think about marketplaces, and this is going to sound quite odd, but you look at a marketplace like Airbnb, right?
Yeah.
Where you've got lots of people who before Airbnb just wouldn't have wanted to stay in people's houses, right? And so they've almost kind of created a market that used to be a bit seedy and a bit shifty. Did you ever do couch surfing?
No.
I couch surfed once
And
in a different time in my life.
But now it's the thing as well. And
Yeah.
like it's in now through Airbnb, it's almost like a similar concept.
So they've
You're absolutely
created
It's
a
similar with
market.
Uber as well, isn't it?
Yeah, they've made it more safe, and they've got all of these people who see it as probably better and the standard rather than going to a hotel. Then on the flip side of it, you need to have many hosts who are willing to give their spaces, who think it's safe, who know that their property is going to be safe, and who are encouraged to either rent out a room or their entire house. And so you're dealing with you know, two different types of individual, two different types of business, and you need to have a platform that serves different audiences. And so for us, I think about the fact that, you know, we're aggregating this community of founders, but they're not our customers. You know, our customers are the institutional partners that we work with. They're the funding organizations, they're the government institutions, and we need to be providing something which gives them an opportunity to make an impact, going to that mission, you know, economic growth and bringing everyone on that journey, whilst also making ourselves relevant to the founders whose landscape is constantly changing. So very long answer there, but I think I often look at the products who are kind of creating spaces and bringing people together in new ways using technology is quite impressive.
I agree, and particularly the point of I'm always inspired, but also just amazed at some of the businesses you've talked about, the ability to the risk as well, because you know I imagine many people think, nah, that's not going to work. It's just because nobody's going to allow you to stay in their home, or you know that trust element's never going to be there. But the ability to push on, and you know similarly with Foundervine, I think it's inspiring, but also it takes a level of boldness and risk taking to be able to understand actually this is where we want to be able to get to. Absolutely.
And there are founders a lot closer to home who are doing amazing things, you know, in our wider networks as well. Have you come across Ruka Hair?
That name does seem familiar.
Yeah, so Ruka is a hair care business that was founded by a founder called Tendai. And Tendai figured that, you know, there was a better way for women to wear hair extensions. You know, don't know how much you know about hair extensions, not judging or anything. I'm not judging or anything. But they tend to be kind of, if they're synthetic, they're made of plastic. They tend to be quite irritating. And so she's been working with a lab to actually build a kind of protein-based hair extension that women could use, and has had incredible success with it to date. You know, they're selling online, they're selling in retailers, and they've just had a really interesting journey. And it's a perfect example of a founder who sees a problem in their community and builds an innovative and relevant solution towards solving it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And you know, one I wanted to pick up on a stat that I recently saw, and actually it's particularly relating to Foundervine and some of your work, which was that it's according to a report by the Entrepreneurship Network that 39% of the UK's fastest growing startups had at least one migrant co-founder. And particularly the context and the situation and the current discussion within the UK around migrants and as well. And I wanted to explore your thoughts as to why do you think that is, or is that a surprise to you? Are you seeing some of that in a Foundervine network, and particularly if you have one co-founder that's a migrant, it suggests that there are multiple experiences within that founder network. So it'd be good to understand, is that a strength as well?
So it's been a very tricky time to have the conversations that you're having, as you said, and I'm sure you're having lots of conversations every day around how we change the narrative, the prevailing narrative around, you know, the value that migrant communities provide. And what I don't want to do is kind of justify why, you know, we should have migration, you know, how valuable it is for the economy. But one thing I'd say is that because of the nature of our work, a lot of our founders are migrants or they're second generation immigrants, and they have direct ties to other parts of the world. At a time when the UK is thinking, what does its future look like outside of Europe? And how do we increasingly make sure we're selling all over the world? You know, and I think about you know, some of the companies that are in our network. I've invested in a company that makes hair care and skincare products using shea butter that it sources from Ghana, and the founder is a second generation Ghanaian immigrant. And you know, we see ties like that. We have founders who have ties to all over the world, to India, to South America. And the value that comes from having people who are able to open markets to the UK is unparalleled. We don't have that in other countries that don't have such diverse populations. And then on top of that, the data consistently shows us that diverse teams deliver better results, not just a diversity in terms of ethnicity, but diversity in terms of background, in terms of knowledge, you know. Teams that have mixed genders on them, they do deliver better outcomes. And so for me, I think that moving towards a narrative, which is that in order to get the best, we need to make sure we have all of the different voices in the room. In order to be internationally relevant, we need to make sure we have culturally appropriate and experienced voices in the room. And it is the absolute worst time to be saying that we need fewer migrants, because these are the people who are going to, you know, continue to give us that tie to the rest of the world.
Well said. And you know, I it wasn't a surprise to me when I saw that stat, because actually I think you're absolutely right. Having diversity thought, diversity experience in teams is so important in terms of not just for a business, but also, you know, from my particular background, I think diverse teams make for better policy making. I think it's better for public services. I think it's better for making sure that you are reflecting, which often is a diverse community, both in thought and background as well. So,
absolutely. What is your background, by the way?
I guess a bit of a mixture. So it's public services, probably public service in its essence, and I spent time as an elected councillor for 8 years, representing Southwark, Peckham in Southwark, South London.
A very diverse population in those boroughs.
And you know, and one thing I found that was, it's always, I'd say this to anybody, but what I think is the beauty of Southwark, but all across the UK, and to be honest, many cities that I visit across the globe, is it's almost people bringing their authentic self, also yet wanting to celebrate and learn from each other, recognizing and, you know, wanting to integrate, but bringing their authentic self is so important. And absolutely, that's what I found so fascinating as a counsellor, particularly, you know, at moments of great challenge to our community, people coming together. And one of the reasons why I set up Unlikely Alliance was sadly after the death of George Floyd, but I was tasked as a counsellor to be able to bring people together within the borough. And one of the things that we did was we set up community conversations, which was, how do we ensure that this is a moment that we can all stand together? We called it Southwark Stands Together because it's important that we all work together to tackle injustice and racism. But what I found so inspiring was, at moments of real difficulty, was people all across the borough from all different backgrounds. Some of our pensioners, some of our younger people, all different backgrounds. People who have fifth generation Southwark residents, people who just moved over here 10 years ago, all coming together to say, actually, Southwark is a place which celebrates our diversity, celebrates our rich heritage, yes, celebrates our traditions, and we can do all of that and be quite unique and come together as well. So that for me, I believe, is always something that I'm particularly proud of. And more recently, I've had the privilege of working as an advisor to the Mayor of London, and now I kind of work in diplomacy for an organisation called C40 Cities. And the discussion around migration, but particularly around linked to business, like that we're having, I think it's so important because so much of business is about, by no means am I an expert, so take it with a pinch of salt.
Go for it.
I'm wax lyrical about business and everyone's going to be like, you don't run any businesses. But so much about business is the ability to learn from what has happened already. Like this, so many businesses, and you would have seen this, so many businesses like don't make it the first time, and they kind of dust their shoulders off and try again as
Absolutely.
well. And the ability to be resilient, but then the ability to learn is so important. And if you have diversity of thought, that is so important.
And some of the most successful businesses are second, third time founders, because it's not failing, it's learning a lesson and then doing it again. And the same resilience that allows entrepreneurs to thrive allows them to recognize when they need to pivot, stop and start again. So I would always back founders who have built businesses and quote unquote failed, because they are actually far more resilient and likely to learn from those mistakes than first time founders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I've got so many questions I want to ask you, but we are about to hit our time, and I just wanted to ask a couple more questions, if that's okay. But one of the things is, somebody's listening right now or watching, and they're a young person, they're about to start up a business, they want to start up a business, they might even want to start up a community organisation as well, and they're thinking about doing it with an unlikely alliance. What would be your advice to them about how they go about doing that, and particularly from your experience with Foundervine?
Yes, so and I say this from our experience and from my own personal experience. So I'm someone from, my parents came to the UK in the 80s, and they settled in an area that was unfamiliar to them, tried to build a life of their own. And I've just been surrounded by a rich kind of tapestry of people my entire life, and also a lot of people.
Tottenham is similar.
Absolutely, and a lot of people who maybe didn't have very much as well. And in that time, what you see when people are having to figure it out is a lot of coming together, like you said. And there's something that I see in that when people don't feel included in the economy, when they don't feel seen in the economy, in the companies that, rule our economy in different ways, and the companies that govern our lives in different ways, they start to withdraw. They start to, create alternative structures, not all of them being positive. I think that's one way of saying what I'm trying to say. And so there's something in, how do we take that pride you had in Southwark and how do we kind of blow it up? And, I was with Howard Dorber, the Deputy Mayor, yesterday morning, and he said, London wants to be the kind of like innovation capital. London wants to be the place you want to go if you want to build a successful business. To do that, we first need pride. We first need to feel seen and included in the economy. So what does that mean for a person as an individual? It means not being afraid to be in spaces like we were talking about in the very beginning of this episode, where it might be intimidating. You might be the only person that looks like you or has your lived experience, but being able and willing to be in the room and shake things up is the first step. We see ourselves as corporate activists at Foundervine. We'll be in those boardrooms and we'll be advocating for more people like us who have similar backgrounds to be in those spaces as well. So the first thing is giving people that confidence and creating spaces where we can bring people together who have different backgrounds different ideas and who can build together. And it's only then that we start demystifying some of that. It's only then that we start encouraging, collaboration and connection. And I think it's then that forms the kind of kernel of the ideas that we need for tomorrow's economy, for sure.
Very, very sound advice. And I love the corporate activism.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that again.
I don't know if I'd be in the street with a placard necessarily.
I know.
But I feel like in the boardrooms, I'm doing my thing.
It's absolutely true. There's many ways to create change, and being able to do it in the boardroom and being able to ensure the boardroom is more reflective of the ecosystem of founders and their richness of backgrounds is so important. So it leads me to ask the question I know you've been waiting for, which is,
oh gosh,
at the Unlikely Alliance, we believe nothing unites people more than music, and wanted to ask, thinking about some of the unlikely alliances that you've ever experienced or you've had the ability to work with, what would be your go-to karaoke song which would illustrate that unlikely alliance?
Oh,
I'm not going to ask you to sing it.
Yes, please don't, because I don't have the dulcet tones. But no, it's actually maybe a bit of a niche sounding one. But there's a song called Created for This by an artist called Francesca. And every time I'm kind of like feeling a bit down, I'll listen to that song. Okay. Because it is fundamentally about the fact that, we all have a strong sense of purpose and a strong sense of why. And, we shouldn't doubt ourselves because we need to be walking in that purpose. And I think that goes for a lot of people who, like we've said, don't feel seen, don't feel like, they have the confidence to move forward in whatever field that they're in. You were created for what you're doing, so move forward.
I can't think of a better way to end this episode. Izzy Obeng, MB, thank you so much for joining us on the Unlikely Alliance podcast. And hopefully see you doing bigger and greater things in the future.
Amazing. Thank you for having me.
The Unlikely Alliance with Johnson Situ. Bridging differences, sparking conversations.